I probably should have started with this question, but I think, yeah, I just think after getting this far through the conversation, one thing that's come across is like there is so much energy from you guys in terms of what you're doing, what you want to get done, and how you want to do it. How did this team come together? Like, I know there's just four of you here, which in itself is quite a large group, but like, there's 26 of you on page six or whatever of the first edition in terms of putting it together, and I'm sure there are loads more people in kind of your support networks helping you here and there that aren't named or whatever for whatever reason. Like, how did this whole thing come together? Like as in, so I didn't actually realize how many people were involved and kind of how big the operation was, and it's utterly impressive. So how, like, where did this start? Who did it start with? How did the team develop? Like, how did you get from kind of like zero to where you guys are today?
So it started with literally just a light bulb of an idea, sketching out what it would look like. Um, I was sitting in a library. I was like, we need to do this. This would be really cool. And I, reached out to my brother who was really passionate about this. We hadn't really formed a nonprofit yet. We haven't filed the paperwork yet, but like we were like, let's do this. And it was COVID. And I was like, what other time am I gonna do this? Passion project time starts in COVID. And we just messaged people on like the sick Discord, Reddit, like email list that we had from working in previous organizations. Just anything, any place where we could talk about it, create an Instagram, repost it in our stories. We actually got a lot of people interested right off the bat. And some of those people are no longer with staff or like made it to the final edition because it did take us a while. There were definitely so many hiccups in between. And I think Amik and Jessica, who joined a little bit after, right, like the very initial phases of the magazine, can speak more to that and how they felt joining the team. So it literally was just outreach and outreach. And the bigger the team got, the more people shared and people joined. And we interviewed, we asked what you want to do, and nothing exclusive, but everyone was willing to lend a helping hand.
So in my head, the more people you would include, the more complicated it gets because there's more disagreements over translations, philosophy, the way the narrative should be told. Even just in our conversation, I've already kind of put my hat out there in the ring in terms of kind of what my perspective is of the Sing Sabha. How then have you managed to go? Like, how have you managed to blend all of that together? And I think it's an amazing feat, and I think everyone that kind of is exposed to your work should take a kind of a huge leaf out of your book, because to do something with so many people on something that can be so sensitive or delicate is a huge accomplishment in itself. But kind of, could you just talk more upon how, like, how have you managed to blend all of those, because there's obviously everyone's bringing in their own thought process, whatever that is. Like, how did then that kind of blend, and how did you ensure that it was kind of like a comfy ride? Because sometimes, like, everyone is aware of what Twitter can be like. Like, I think that's a good microcosm of how these conversations can go. So yeah, how did you guys manage all of that?
Definitely. So, just to start off, before Jessica or Meager or Praveen take over, one of the things that we really emphasize in just the environment of Anhad, whether it's on like our staff Discord or in our Zoom calls, is feedback and collaboration. No matter who is on the editing team, like if we are having an editing session, it is not just the editors there. It is everybody is allowed to be present and everybody is encouraged to be present. So no matter what is done, whether it's a layout meeting with Moko, our fantastic director of layout, everybody is encouraged to be on that call. And we constantly, like, every meeting that we have, we are expecting feedback. Like if I don't hear feedback, or if Jessica doesn't hear feedback, Praveen or Meek don't hear feedback in what they're doing, we consider that a problem. Like we're like, something is wrong. Like there has to be a way to improve and do stuff. And because we provide that space, I think it's really lent to, like, I don't think we've ever had a disagreement on staff, like anything major. Like it might be, I think this word might mean this, or maybe this word might mean this. And then at that point, we talk it out. We're like, okay, what is the context and how that works? And we really dive into that instead of, getting at each other's throats. And because we have that atmosphere, it works really well. And we've never had a problem with that, you know?
I think one of the things that makes it such a productive, I guess, collaborative sixth space is that we've made such an emphasis on just the fact that everybody is learning. There's no right or wrong in learning and just getting to that point together. We are more than open to, you know, having these discussions and like opposing views. But that being said, um, there's I guess just this sort of humble environment in which, if you don't know something, I will be, glad to lend you a hand and help you out in XYZ sort of thing. But I just think that there's no like hierarchy of like, who knows more or who is more well versed and anything like that. And I think that that's definitely helped all of us in terms of not just working on this magazine, but just in terms of our own spiritual experiences. I think we've developed as people throughout the last 2 years so much just because of the sangat that we have in this magazine and the environment that we've created to facilitate that.
Just to add on, I joined the team I think a little later than most people. I wasn't in the original core team, but I think when I joined in, I never had met anyone in the team in person before, and it was so amazing to see how compassionate everyone was, how supportive everyone was, and like Jessica just said, I think it also reflected in how no one was judgmental at all with anything. And I think that's really rare to see in six spaces, at least from my experience, to not have that judgment. Um, so I honestly think that's a really big deal of its own. And another thing that I really think the Anhad magazine team does really well is there's a huge sense of trust within all of us. And I think, like, for example, as director of media, I feel like I have a lot of liberty in what I think, or if I have a certain vision, I feel like everyone really trusts whatever vision I have. And it's really helped me develop as well as a person. I feel a lot more confident. So I think it really extends past just being part of this magazine team. It's really me a lot of skills as well. So I think it's been a really great experience so far, and I'm really, again, very excited for this magazine to um, be in everyone's hands soon.
No, that is actually like it's amazing to hear how kind of positive it's been for you all. I think or equally that brings me on very nicely onto my next question, which is kind of for all of you, like what have you guys learned along the way? And that could be anything. That could be like in terms of your personal development, your spiritual development. I don't know, even just sometimes being able to like paraphrase things is a really useful skill that takes absolutely ages, or I don't know what it is, but like it sounds like a really, to be quite honest, I'm kind of jealous because I wish there was something like that around where I lived, because I'd love to be kind of head first in something like that. But kind of, yeah, what have you guys kind of learned along the way with doing this project? Because it sounds like there's been so much put into it. It's almost like you guys would be learning things almost like daily, and especially if you're like sitting reading around like translations and transliterations of Gurbani and debating, all right, well, what does this actually mean? Which is a rabbit hole in itself, technically. But yeah, what, like, whoever wishes to take the mic, like, what have you guys learned along the way doing all of this?
So for me personally, I think I've learned a lot. At the time that I joined Anhud, I wasn't really too knowledgeable about Sikhi. Like I had only known like the basic Sakhis that I think everyone has heard. And for me, I worked on the article about Amrit Vela. I would have never known that there's like a proper reasoning behind why Sikhs wake up and practice Amrit Vela. Like that was really eye opening for me. And yeah, just learning like that there are specific reasons for why we do what we do and why we read the Banis that we read really helped me understand exactly like what it is that I'm learning.
One thing I've learned is not to be afraid. And I've also learned how to use commas and quotes properly, but that's a side issue we can get into another time. Thanks to Jessica. We've like literally spent hours debating on where commas should go. Never thought I would be using my time like that, but I have, and it feels rewarding now that I know how to use it. But I've learned not to be afraid. of going and opening. My parents have a library downstairs of Steeks, and I'm like, I can't read this. Like, I don't know how to read this stuff. Like, this is way too hard, and I'm not afraid to open up a Steek and navigate it and be like, Dad, I need you to explain this Shabbat to me. And like have that conversation with my parents, like, what does this Shabbat mean? Or like, oh, okay, like, what do I need to read for this, and ask for help. Um, and I think that has made things a lot better for me in terms of my own personal journey. I mean, I've definitely learned a lot of the stuff that we put into the article, because like these were just topics I had heard about that like correlated with the theme of time, but it was never something I truly knew. And now I know them. And now I want to know more. And so I'm not afraid to know more now. And I think that's a really big thing that um a lot of people start with. Like, I mean, it's always hard to start something, right? And it's like you feel I feel like that's another big thing where Anhad can kind of bridge the gap, is where people feel afraid or they feel like discouraged because they're like, oh, this entire thing is in Punjabi, I can't do this, or I have to wake up at Amrit Villa every day, like I have to do Bhat 5 times, like they get discouraged really easily. And I am in this boat too. Like, I'm not speaking without including myself. So I think that's what Anhad has taught me, to not be afraid, especially of Bani and your own religion. Like, there's no reason for that ever. And like my gurus wouldn't want me to ever feel like that either.
I think just, in the essence of just being able to sort of enable other people to understand their history and their bodies. I think we've done the same for ourselves, because all of us come from different levels of just our own knowledge. None of us claims to know everything, but I definitely think we've grown in this journey. It's been so interesting. I mean, like for myself, I can definitely say that I've learned a lot in my experience with the editorial part of this, and that I didn't understand that even the resources that we do have, some of them in here in the diaspora, how entrenched they are in the Western lens. That's been something that I think all of us have sort of grappled with in creating this magazine, is just it's hard to separate yourself from that Western lens, because as Jasmine said before, like we are a product of it, having grown up here, right? And so it's interesting in that, for example, like in our editorial like guide or like development, one thing that we've done is we've strayed away from the idea of God or Waheguru as a male entity, right? So I think that a lot of our translations or our resources for translations tend to use they use he him pronouns, and sort of that like gender binary, that I think that when you have that even in your translations, inadvertently you think of, well, your idea of just God and what God can be is warped. And I think that that translates to how you think about the rest of your sort of life as well, is when you have this sort of like limited view of what God is and what God can be, then I think that sort of diminishes your I guess your idea of what Sikhi is as well. And so that's been an interesting process to embark on. But yeah, I definitely think that it's been really fun growing spiritually, but then also growing spiritually within this Sangat. I think that's been even better.
Yeah, and for me, I'll keep mine pretty simple because I don't want to give too much away about the magazine, but I think it's one thing to really understand history or baseline surface level understand like historical facts, the Gurbani translations that you see, but I think it's another thing to actually truly understand how to apply it. And I think something that we've really intentionally done with the magazine is using real life examples, modern examples, and be able to really apply it in my own life. And I think the magazine does a wonderful job of doing that. So that's something I really learned about a lot of different topics. And so that's just a general statement. But I think the magazine's very accessible and relatable, which is kind of rare to find in a lot of texts that are out there.
No, touche. You've just got my mind wandering now because you were talking about You were talking about the translations of how kind of the names of the divine are translated within Gurbani. And yes, I completely get where you're coming from. I think it's interesting because there are some, and I know we're going down a rabbit hole now, but like there are some terms that are masculine in Punjabi, and so they're translated. But I think the problem is then when they're feminine, they're not, and that's then obviously the issue. And then obviously, and this is also why I think it's really interesting with this. I don't want to get into the debate, but I just find it interesting that you're coming from a Singh Sabha angle when actually a lot of the Bani that commemorates the female or like the divine feminine energy is actually shunned by them and disregarded. Not all of them, admittedly. Equally, like by counting Nambat Mahan Kosh does include Sarbo Granth and all the rest of it. So like some of the stalwarts of the Singh Sabha movement did accept that, but yeah, it's just an interesting it just is making me think. But anyway, just putting that to the side, coming back to the first edition of the magazine, why, or kind of what was the thought process about picking the topic for that, which is obviously time? Like why did you guys think it was, like what was the thought process behind picking that?
So when we first got started, we had like a list of, I think like 15 or 20 topics, and everyone was so excited at the time that we felt time was really important, especially because we had the farmers protest going on and there were just other world events that were happening, and it like made us think about the different parallels in history and current times. So we felt like time was good to go with at the time.
So you reached the end of part 3. Part 4 will be released on February 24th, and the whole episode will be released on March 17th. If you don't want to wait for the complete release, becoming a level 2 member or above of my YouTube channel will give you instant access to this and all future podcasts.